Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and in this video we'll be talking about burst. Burst and chasing for the biggest numbers has been a pastime of so many in World of Warcraft over expansions, and in Shadowlands it's no different. Whether it is burst within PvP or burst within PvE, whether this is a build that is actually viable and playable that just deals astronomically massive numbers, or just some cheesy little setup that's difficult to pull off, but if the stars align it is glorious. I wanted to highlight in this video some of the 10 different builds out there that probably push out the most amount of damage in patch 9.1. It's going to be a mixture of stuff that's viable and less viable. At the top, we're going to have the greatest burst that is the strongest overall in my opinion, and towards the bottom are going to be something more cheesy, something with a bit of a setup, something that isn't really often played, but when it does work, it is amazing. So I do hope you guys enjoy this build list video, but also most of you guys watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy the content on this channel, hit subscribe, hit the bell if you're watching the videos anyway. Let's jump into the burst update. Towards the bottom of the list, we're going to start off with Demonology Warlock one-shot, including your pets and massive Demon Bolt. Pairing Demonology Warlocks together with the Necrolord Covenant unlocks your ability of Decimating Bolt, which upon use will empower your Demon Bolts. The lower the target's health, the more damage Decimating Bolt does. The more damage Decimating Bolt does, the further it empowers your Demon Bolt damage. Together with a couple talents as well as with a legendary for 100% crit. And if you're able to spawn an astronomical amount of demons, you can go for a really one-shotty build burst. This one is my favorite because it takes a bit to pull off, but it does make Necrolord Warlocks a little bit stronger, and in PvP the amount of damage that a Demonology Warlock can do, which is surprising because most players expect for that Tyrant to do the biggest slapping damage, but seeing that damage come from the Warlock himself instead of the pets is definitely a breath of fresh air. Next on this list will be Subtlety Rogue Gloomblade Backstab Burst. This is a very cheesy build that hasn't seen any nerfs whatsoever. It just doesn't really have a lot of viability besides surprise damage out of nowhere. It also uses the talent of Gloomblade, which doesn't get a lot of play, as well as a conduit where your Shadow Strikes stack up the damage of your backstab. Gloomblade is backstab, and Gloomblade does more damage than backstab, so it gains all the benefits of that backstab stacking. Together with a legendary that empowers the damage of your backstab even further, which also empowers Gloomblade, with a conduit that empowers the shadow damage, which applies towards Gloomblade as well, you're able to do some really cheesy bursts out of nowhere. It's just, Subtlety is really good spec for burst to begin with, but this is just a lot of compacted burst in a single global, in a single little jab at the target, which is really cheesy in itself, but Subtlety Rogues are pretty known for cheesy bursts out of nowhere. Next is going to be my favorite for mages, as I don't really play a lot of fire mage since I'm kind of an arcane one-trick whenever I do play my mage, but the fire mage pyroclasm is something that I've always wanted to make work. It's been my dream to make it kind of decent and viable within PvE scenarios, but it just hasn't really worked out in dungeons and raids. However, this big old pyroclasm that you can beef up with pyroclasm together with the Kyrian Wombo combo works out really well. All you need to do is just fish for a pyroclasm proc, and if you're running Disciplinary Command Legendary, just make sure to use a Frosty and an Arcane spell before you start firing off a bunch of fire abilities, and together with Combustion, with the Disciplinary Command Lego, and all the other modifiers, you're looking at a pretty big pyroblast. If you're able to line it up with your Kyrian Burst, you're looking at some really cheesy big damage that doesn't even need a lot of gear. And that's probably my favorite part about this, is my mage is nowhere near gear for fire, but if you're able to get a proc and if the cards line up, the amount of damage you can do is astronomical. Next, we have the Retribution Paladin Night Fae Casino Burst. This is one of those builds that actually has quite a bit of punch to it, but if you're also able to get a bunch of abilities to proc all at once, and if all of them get that 80% chance to do 60% more damage benefit from the Night Fae ability, then you're looking at a very casino jackpot kind of all abilities proc at once, and all abilities get that secondary proc from the Night Fae Covenant ability. This one can actually be applied for other classes as well, as Night Fae can just be simply used to buff any other classes, but we wanted to put it together for Retribution in particular, just to show off just how much damage it does. And damage it definitely is going to do, it's just very RNG. This one is the epitome of RNG burst, as with the other class builds, you are looking at something where you can actually control the amount of burst you can put out. There's a bit more player involvement. This one is all about RNG, so if you roll high on a bunch of different modifiers, you're looking at massive astronomical damage that's really eye-opening. But this one is only for those that are looking for the most randomness, where you don't really want to have that much player control in it, and you're just fine with it being high and being low at times, and you're just looking for something really cheesy, really wacky that could just kind of win you games randomly. Destruction Warlock would be the first class that's actually viable spec for PvE and PvP, where it's not the greatest at either one of these options, but it's still pretty decent. It's always have had a very front-loaded playstyle on your Chaos Bolts, which is why it's always naturally been bursty. If you're able to get a bunch of Chaos Bolts back to back, especially when there's a variety of different debuffs or a big haste buff that gets provided to you, maybe like a PI from a priest, then Gesture is looking at some great burst even on 2-target cleave. So this one is starting to be one of those builds from this list where you're looking at more realistic bursts that players are using right now. This one would be higher on the list if only Destruction Warlock was more viable and better within all different content of World of Warcraft like dungeons, raids, and PvP. Demon Hunters and Hunt has been one of those things that took a lot of players by surprise. Demon Hunters always had decent damage for the last few expansions of World of Warcraft, of course depending on the patch, but towards the end of the expansion with Legion, as well as in Battle for Azeroth, they had really decent damage. Not really super bursty, but also not sustainy, it's more like constant pressure. However, in Shadowlands, pairing them together with a Hunt ability, they become a linebacker that's there just to tackle down whoever they see down to the ground, together with a Hunt with a Fell Rush to follow afterwards. It's been a little bit on the cheesy side for PvE and PvP because it's just a lot of damage all at once, but for PvE it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. It's not the first time they've used Fell Rushes to their advantage, especially with the momentum build. For PvP, it was pretty ridiculous for a lot of players because this damage kind of came out of nowhere, and especially if they used it as a tank Demon Hunter for the longest, you were actually looking at legitimate one-shots. To this day, in patch 9.1 and going into 9.15, I still think it's going to be a very strong option for many Demon Hunters, unless there's going to be some massive meta swings, which Blizzard would really need to apply some debuffs and buffs for different builds in order to supplement this. But Demon Hunters as Night Fae are still very strong, and this burst combo is still very bursty to this day. Arms Warriors are known as monsters in no matter what kind of gameplay they're into. Arms Warriors got a buff for patch 9.1, especially outside of the Venthyr Covenant, and they've been able to take advantage of it everywhere else. Kyrian is also really good, Night Fae is really good, but where the crazy and really bursty damage comes out from is Necrolord. Necrolord, while not the strongest PvE covenant, it is very powerful in PvP, providing the Arms Warrior 400 points of mastery. Together with a bunch of different modifiers, they're literally able to run enemies over like a freight train. So if an Arms Warrior queues up into your arena, and if you see that big green banner flying from above their shoulders, that means you're honestly a deer in the headlights and you better move, otherwise you're going to be flattened. Warriors in general are really fantastic when it comes to damage, whether it is PvE or PvP, but it's just that extra layer in PvP, that extra cheesiness of just being able to execute a quick charge into a couple executes, and if everything crits with all these modifiers on a really geared warrior, you're looking at kind of some cheesy damage that's a little bit RNG, but as long as you get yourself a big old charge and a Mortal Strike to follow, while all your buffs are running and maybe even an execute to finish off a target, this is a lot of damage all at once, and it's going to slam down on anybody you see like a freight train. Convoke druids have been a plague, some may say, in this game since the very beginning inception of Shadowlands. It is an ability we haven't seen before, where it literally plays your class. At first, it was something that played your class every 2 minutes, but now with Legendary, it can happen every 1 minute. Convoke, as an ability, will try to use as many druid abilities, especially the powerful ones, like New Moon, for example, for the longest time for boomies, where you could literally one-shot players if you rolled lucky. However, they've been nerfing this ability a little so you can no longer get some cheesy damage, but that still allows druids to get more star surges, which is very consistent. Then it's also more bites for feral druids, also very consistent. And now they have a minute-long Convoke version where even during that minute CD, you're able to execute a ton of damage in such short succession that even a somewhat geared druid can actually be kind of competitive with everybody else. Convoke is still a very powerful build for druids even today, whether you play feral and even balanced druids for PvE content. It is still very crucial in terms of being able to output insane damage. Hell, even restoration and guardian druids will swap to different forms like boomy form in order to push out damage, even though that's not their respective role. So Convoke still maintains a very powerful playstyle that is very popular and is still insanely bursty. Necrolord Windwalker monks has been kind of new in patch 9.1. Prior to this, it was mostly all about the Kyrian burst that lined up together with your Zuan, but swapping out for the Bone Dust Brew, it just worked out a lot better in AoE scenarios, which is kind of where monk dominates right now. But even in pure single target scenarios, Bone Dust Brew isn't that far behind, especially in some cheesy stuff like PvP. If you're able to get enough crit with certain legendaries, you're actually able to, dropping down Bone Dust Brew with your full burst with all the different modifiers from your Storm, Earth and Fire to all the different buffs. It's just a lot of stacking buffs all together, where if you're lucky enough, the procs could be massive and the burst could be high. It's just something kind of came out of nowhere for Windwalker monks, and I wonder if Blizzard will continue keeping this as a strong build or nerfing in the future, because there's some really cheesy stuff you can do out of it, especially in PvP, where in dungeons and raids, they have some strong moments, but it feels mostly tame as monks fill their role mostly within AoE PvE scenarios. Like if a bunch of mobs spawn on a boss fight, they're able to delete those mobs, but in terms of doing damage to the boss itself, it's not like monks are just going to be taken off. They have a very specific role, and they're exceptionally good at it, but it's not like they're amazing in all kinds of content. In PvP, it's a whole nother story where they can absolutely just decimate and sweep enemies out of the floor. So it's a pretty common scenario to see a monk in an arena and just simply getting dusted by them. So I wonder if that'll change in the future, but right now it's actually one of the safest birds that is out there, and it's really powerful. Definitely worth checking out. Finally, at the very top of the list, I had to go with the Venthyr boomkin. It is a ramp burst every 3 minutes, but I think boomies do absolutely ungodly amounts of damage every 3 minutes. This is the strongest burst I think in World of Warcraft in patch 9.1 currently. Of course, in PvP, you're gonna think to yourself, well, I could just control the druid. Well, maybe I could just interrupt him, hit him with a silence, maybe get counter-aggressive, force him to play bear form. That is totally a viable strategy. However, this build, this burst, has already been done at the high level. So if a group has coordination, this is possible. However, where it's even more possible is within dungeons and within raids, where bosses and ads don't know how to shut down druid burst. So this is where you just have unmitigated opportunity just to do the most amount of damage all by yourself. Looking at a lot of the logs, druids are just doing some insane numbers just by themselves, even without any benefits like PI, as some classes can do amazingly well with a bunch of different buffs that can benefit to their damage output, faster casting, or just simply being able to get more abilities out, which means more damage. Boomies don't even need any of that help. They can just do incredible damage all by themselves. And while this isn't really like the burstiest stuff within a short moment, the fact that they can keep going up and up and up in damage, where they go to like 60,000 damage, and then a few seconds pass, they're at 70,000, 80,000, 90,000, 100,000 inside of Mythic Pluses, 120, 130, 140. The damage just doesn't stop while they have their cooldowns rolling. And because this is viable damage that's actually used in raids, actually used in dungeons, and yes, even actually played in PvP, this is the meta build. This is why I put it at the top of the list, because this isn't anything cheesy. This is just the norm, and this norm just does the most amount of damage output, which is why Boomy Druids are just incredibly good right now in patch 9.1. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts. Which burst do you think deserves to be on this list and which ones didn't? Maybe there's a build and a burst playstyle that I missed completely. Just something that's super cheesy but under the radar. If you guys let me know, I'll definitely try them out in the comments. But thank you all so much for watching. I definitely hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you all so much, and I'll see all of you in the next one.